They say hunting and fishing can be dated back more than 2 million years. Throughout the years, the historic angler and hunter has steadily evolved into the avid hunter and angler that we know and love today. Welcome to the Outdoor Defiance podcast. As you listen, you will hear comical stories, companies talking about their products, researchers talking about their research, and overall ways to help you become a better outdoorsman. Welcome to today's episode.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Outdoor Defiance podcast. Before we jump in this week's episode, I just want to take a minute and thank you guys for listening, reaching out with the calls, the texts, the comments. Everything means the world to Gunner and I. Going in this, we really didn't think we'd see the growth that we're seeing. And we knew we'd do decent, but probably take some time. But we're actually growing faster than we thought. And that's because of you guys. So definitely from the bottom of our hearts, thank you for that. We really didn't know what to expect, but man, we've had fun. So I hope you guys continue listening. You know, we've reached out to some people that I didn't think we'd be able to get on, and they're jumping on. So this is awesome. Some of them are, in a couple of weeks. Some of them are a few months out, almost a year out. But we have a lot in the works, and we're very excited to bring this to you. But let's dive into episode 20. This week we have Dallas Baraber, which is the Oklahoma big game wildlife biologist. He covers the whole state of Oklahoma. And we're going to go in some of the topics that you see on the internet right now, the kind of hot topics. We're probably going to ruffle some feathers, but this is not what the episode's meant to do. It's more to answer the questions that we didn't know, hopefully the questions that you didn't know, with actual something to back it up, not just some random person or a random page. I really think you'll get a lot out of this episode. Without further ado, let's get into it. Dallas, thank you for joining us today. And kind of start this off, and let's kind of go into how you got started with your degree and how it rolled to the job you're at now.
Yeah, so my name's Dallas Baraber. I'm the big game biologist for the Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation. So essentially what that means is I am kind of that 30,000 foot, statewide management view for whitetail, mule deer, elk, and pronghorn. And I got into that. I went to Oklahoma State, got a degree in wildlife ecology. And then right out of college, I actually worked for a high fence deer ranch over in Tahlequah for about a year. And all throughout college, I actually interned for the wildlife department. So that kind of got my foot in the door. And my wife, she at the time got a really big job promotion that made her have to come back to the city. So I kind of had to pack our bags from the deer farm situation and head back to the city, and saw that they had posted that position and applied, and 7 years down the road, and here we are.
So you said you do the mule deer, or all pretty much the big game species. Yeah. Kind of go over, what that all entails.
Yeah, so a lot of people, they think about a wildlife biologist, or at least in Oklahoma, being like an area-specific biologist. You've got a biologist at Call WMA, for instance, and they're more boots on the ground, taking care of management plans for the habitat, promoting habitat work for all of the various game species that can be chased around on those WMAs. So I'm more on the side of, overall population dynamics, looking at, buck to doe ratios, looking at fawning and recruitment rates. And then there's a lot of stuff like from a legislative standpoint where I'm, requested to, make presentations or make recommendations for larger scale legislative changes. So bag limit changes, season length changes, things like that. So it's really kind of that 30,000 foot view, as opposed to that really fine scale with a lot more of our area biologists.
Right. So let's kind of take this a little farther back in time. Did you grow up hunting and fishing in the outdoors, or did you find a passion later in life?
Yeah, I think that my story is pretty similar to most of our outdoorsmen and women here in the state. As my dad and grandpa are who got me into being in the outdoors. I grew up with a fishing pole in my hand, catching sunfish on bread bait as a little bitty kid off the dock of a neighborhood pond in Oklahoma City. And then I was pretty much my dad's shadow at anything and everything I could do to be outside. And I remember the first time I ever got checked by a game warden as a little kid. My dad and I were trout fishing at Romano's, and I kind of put two and two together of like, man, like I can make something. I can turn that into a job, like being around hunting and fishing all the time. And my dad was like, yeah, absolutely, you can, because he originally went to school to get a degree in forestry. So he had kind of known what that was. He ended up going to work for our family business, but he kind of steered me in the right direction to make it a career out of it. And that's what I decided to do.
Yeah. So, and then we're going to go back up to your degree and all that.
Mm-hmm.
How long did it take you to like fully take in like what you need to know for pronghorn, for mule deer, for whitetail? How long did that kind of take you to?
Yeah. I mean, obviously in school, they kind of teach you the basics of just wildlife management. Why is it necessary? What are some techniques that we can do or metrics that we need to look at? But then, a lot of learning some of those, I say rarer species, but,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of emphasis is put on whitetail deer. That's the bread and butter of our state. That's what we have the most of. We've got the most hunters for. So learning a lot about, elk biology and mule deer biology and pronghorn biology, that was a lot of just learning stuff on the job. You're also, the amount of literature that is out there for these species. I mean, I've got just shelves and shelves and shelves of books that refer to all that kind of stuff. So, it's something that you have constantly got to be adapting to, because there's new research being done all the time. New things are being published on not necessarily what to do or what not to do, but just fine tuning some of those management skills for whatever your state's management plan, entails.
Do you have one that you find a little more fascinating than the others, or?
Man, they're all cool in their own little way. Whitetail, that's what I enjoy hunting the most out of all those. So, that's kind of, and it's 95% of what I do is whitetail deer. But man, those other three species, they've all got, quirky, cool kind of things about them that make them tick. So they're a lot of fun when I do get to work with them.
Do you ever get to go work with OSU in any of their studies?
Yeah, so we actually they're working on two right now that involve one's for mule deer and one's for pronghorn, and we basically rubber stamped those research projects where went out, helicopter captured a whole bunch of pronghorn and mule deer up in northwest Oklahoma, and put GPS collars on them. Wow. And that's really telling us movement patterns, what's stopping movement. So fences are actually a big issue with pronghorn. They do not like fencing, and hundreds of years ago there were no fences in the Panhandle, and now they're becoming more and more prevalent every single day. Same thing with crop circles. Big pivots that are starting to get put up out there are really starting to fragment a lot of that habitat. So wanted to look at, movement, how they're relating to other pronghorn. A theory we had was that, man, our Panhandle is only 32 miles tall. So we thought we were sharing a lot of pronghorn with, Kansas and Colorado and New Mexico and Texas. And come to find out that a lot of our pronghorn are pretty homebody type critters. Wow. They're really not moving a whole lot. So just some interesting stuff coming out of there. We were also using something called a vaginal transmitter. So when we would capture those pronghorn, you can insert a transmitter into the birth canal, and as that fawn passes through the birth canal for the birthing process, it spits that transmitter out and lets us know that a fawn has hit the ground. So then we can go collar that fawn, and we can look at fawn survival, we can look at fawn movement, just all those relations. So we did that exact same study. We're on year number 3 with our pronghorn, and then we just got done this last February putting our first mule deer collars on in the history of the state of Oklahoma. So looking forward to seeing kind of what some of that comes out to be. So to answer your original question, yeah, we do work with OSU quite a bit.
Yeah, I almost got to be a part of that pronghorn project for.
As like an assistant, like a grad assistant?
Yeah, so I was working for a graduate student and two graduate students. But One was doing prairie dog research. One was doing loggerhead shrike. We
Yep.
were in Wyoming, and we got done early, so we almost headed up there.
Oh man, that would have been cool. Yeah, it's a pretty cool thing to get to watch. I mean, they've got everything pretty much lined out as far as manpower goes, but we get the invite just to go kind of peek around and see what's going on. So to see all the hard work those people do just to answer some questions that we have is pretty dang cool, especially when you get to see them shoot them with a rocket net out of a helicopter. I mean, it's cool stuff.
Yeah, we had Dr. Chitwood on a while back. Yeah. Is he part of some of that?
Yeah, both of them actually.
Oh, wow. That's pretty cool. He's full of a lot of knowledge.
Yeah.
He was a fun one to talk to.
He has forgotten more than most of us know.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, we went in there to talk about turkeys, and was it mule deer and pronghorn? We're going to kind of talk about the research, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we just flat out the whole time talked about turkeys because he was just so full of information. I was like,
he is a turkey nerd, man.
Yeah, and he knew a lot of stuff. I was very impressed.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's super cool. So you said we don't really share a lot of pronghorn like you think, or like a lot of people thought.
Mm-hmm.
Does that kind of go with mule deer and the elk? Some people seem to think up there that they push down, which I think is true, but you might know something that I don't know.
So most of our elk herds are pretty solitary. And when I say most, I mean everything but the panhandle. A lot of the elk that we're finding in the panhandle are going to be Cimarron County. There's a little blurb of them kind of around Guyman, but most of them are out in Cimarron County. Those elk are pretty mobile. They're moving in and out of New Mexico and Colorado quite a bit, but for the most part, all of our other elk, I mean, we don't have what you would consider to be a migratory herd of elk or mule deer in our state. Now, 3 years from now, I could be putting my foot in my mouth when all that GPS collar data comes back and tells us something completely different about the mule deer. But it's not like what you see in Western states, like the giant mule deer migration that happens in Wyoming. Like you're not seeing that here. We just don't have enough difference in like food availability due to weather. So a lot of the times those deer in Western states, they're spending, spring, summer, and part of early fall in pretty high altitude, just because the available forage that's there is incredibly dense and incredibly nutritious. A lot of nutritional value there, where later in the year all that gets covered in snow, so they have to move. Where in our state, I mean, if they get snow, they just go to the nearest pivot and hang out.
Right.
Yeah. I'm super pumped that we've started looking at that. I've loved the mule deer up there. I've actually shot one when I was younger in high school. I drew up there. So I got to do that rifle hunt, and they're just awesome up there. And I've always wanted, I've always hoped that our population would kind of, keep on the upward trend up there, just because I think they're so cool. They're up there. How much I love them.
So let's kind of go back to kind of what we what we want to go over this podcast. I think, maybe down the road, if we can do antelope and deer, or antelope, mule deer, and elk, that would be great. But a lot of questions are firing up right now about about the whole deer stuff in Oklahoma, and the hot topic across. I mean, I feel like the lower 48, Oklahoma deer hunting has kind of made a name for itself. One of the reasons might be because one of the guys here shot a big deer, but I don't know. That could be a small reason with the whole deal. But no, jokes aside. So why do you think Oklahoma's made such a push in the deer hunting world to be popular, I guess?
I mean, I think there's a couple things that feed into it, and it's one of those deals where it's a perfect storm. For one, accessibility in this state's great. I mean, an over-the-counter tag is getting harder and harder to come by. So anyone and everyone is welcome to come hunt here in the state of Oklahoma. I think social media is a huge part of it. Before, when someone kills a big deer, they'll go to the coffee shop, they'll talk about it, they'll sit at the gas station, people will see it, and it kind of becomes, county lore, so to speak, where nowadays you take that grip and grin and you post it on whatever, platform that you favor, and in 12 hours, that thing has been around the world and back.
Yeah.
So I think that has a big thing to do with it. And I mean, we're killing quality deer in our state every year, and we have been on a heck of a ride here over the last 5, 6, 7 years. And I think a lot of that has to do with just a mindset from a lot of our hunters. Our regulations are built to let people manage their properties the way that they see fit. We don't have anything like antler point restrictions. We don't have any programs like, earn a buck or anything like that some of these other states are trying to accomplish. So I always like to say that we approach it, let's educate instead of regulate. And
Absolutely.
seems to have really caught a lot of traction. And you can see that in, a lot of the harvest data. One of the things that you had mentioned wanting to talk about a little bit is, the fact that, or you said that a lot of young bucks are getting killed. And I would have to disagree with you pretty strongly on that when you look at our harvest data. So we collect age data via jawbones. And we do that at controlled hunts. We do that at a lot of our DMAP cooperators, which are private land cooperators that draw up a management plan with us. They submit all their jaws to us. And then we also go to processors across the state. So like some of these big time processors across the state that are bringing in thousands and thousands of deer, we're hiring college students to come pull jaws for us. And they're in there, and we get a pretty good data set from it. Now, granted, it's anywhere from 3 to 8% of the total harvest. So it's not just a giant representative, but it's a good representative of all of those different management plans. So we get some of the controlled hunt deer off of our public land. We're getting some of the DMAP deer that are coming off of folks that are a little bit more trophy minded. And then, boy, we're catching the whole cupboard at the processors. It's anyone and everyone that gets a deer processed, we're getting our hands on and pulling jaws from. So just some fun data to talk about is, like let's go back to like 1989. That's the first data point I can remember right off the top of my head. 66% of bucks harvested in 1989 were 1.5 years old.
Wow.
Okay. So like you're looking at that now going, oh gosh,
Yeah.
if brown, it's down, dude. Right.
Yeah.
So fast forward to last year, over half of our deer that were harvested, those bucks were at least 3.5 years old or older. It was like 7 or 8% of bucks were harvested at 1.5. So, I mean, and again, we've done all of that just strictly by educating our constituents, just by saying, hey, if you want to have better quality deer, that's why we had that, hunters in the know, let young bucks grow mantra for a long, long time. And I mean, you saw it on everything we put out, bumper stickers and koozies and hats. And I mean, it was just shoving it as much as we could. And I mean, that's really starting to show itself in some of the quality deer that we're seeing harvested across our state.
Right. And before we get any deeper in this, I want to tell the audience that's listening, a lot of this stuff that we're going to go over is not like Gunner and I's views. It's stuff that we have gone over on social media and read people posting and all this. And this is why we brought Dallas on, is because if there's a guy that knows, here he is. So if you're listening, I know we've got a lot of people, they'll listen and be like, your guys' views are crazy. And we're like, this wasn't ours. We found this. So I do want to clear that up before we go any farther. So just because I don't want people to be like,
just kind of we're going to debunk some hot button topics.
Absolutely.
Would be the best thing to talk about. I mean, I see it just as much as you guys do.
Yeah.
You cruise around on any of the social media deals, and it's like somebody holding, like 180-inch deer. And they're like, man, it could have been a 190 if we did this or they did that, or, whatever. And you're just like, guys, come on, man. Like, it's funny to see a lot of that stuff floating around. But yeah, I'm here for it.
Yeah, we get a good laugh at that every year about how many people just hate on each other over stuff. And our theory is, and to back it up, our theory is if it makes you happy, shoot it.
Amen, brother.
But me and Gunner are at a point where we want the mature deer. We're going to a more management mindset because we've had great hunting growing up. So to push ourselves personally, this is not what everyone has to do. We want the bigger deer.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
There's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
And that's a lot of people don't understand. Like, we've been very grateful, and I'm speaking for both of us for our hunting. Like we've both for our age have killed some absolute monsters, and this is where we're at in our life, and we're young for doing it. So if you're listening and you're like, oh, I'm a meat hunter, good. Like we're not talking down on you. We're just covering topics that we see on what we're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
So anyways, I just wanted to cover that before we dove into it. And
Just a little caveat before you show up at all of our doors with torches and pitchforks, man.
Yeah,
We had to say that before the conspiracy theories started getting thrown out over here.
Yeah.
I got enough foil in the cabinet for all of us. We can get our hats on and get after it.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. So overall, do you think is the deer herd in Oklahoma thriving? Are we seeing declines anywhere?
Yeah. As far as the overall picture, I mean, I would say these are the glory days that we're living in as far as population levels, as far as our hunters' mindsets. Things are really starting to gel. Now there will be some year-to-year changes in some of that. I mean, we just came out of a heck of a drought in the western part of the state, as you could tell by half of it burning down over the spring. So that's going to play a little bit into just overall numbers. But as far as, kind of, again, my job is looking at that 30,000 foot view, that long scale trend of things. Deer population's in great shape.
Do you think in the next, I don't want to put a timetable on it. Okay, so we know out east in places way east, there can be too many deer in places. Mm-hmm. Is there a scenario here, if we keep trending up or if we spike up, we could get to a point where we're like, okay, guys, we got to start shooting some does? Is there a scenario where that could happen?
When you're talking east, you're talking stuff like the eastern seaboard, where they've got, just like deer are a problem. And not necessarily we have deer problems, but it's way different than what they're dealing with. Their deer problem is every 1/10 of a mile, there's a dead deer on the side of the road because they're just behind every blade of grass. Oklahoma's kind of unique in the fact that, our metro areas are fairly large in size, not necessarily in population, but like when you look at like the distance from Guthrie all the way down to Noble, like that's one big metropolitan area, and it's starting to expand more and more. So we're starting to kind of creep out into some what would be considered native deer habitat, and you're starting to see a lot of those conflicts where Karen calls because deer are eating her begonias in her garden bed. So we see some of that, and I mean, luckily, the majority of Oklahomans might not hunt, but they at least support it. Mm-hmm. So that problem seems to kind of mitigate itself with, through hunting. There are areas in the past where we've had issues, fairly localized issues, but like with a lot of crop damage. And, I mean, we promote a lot of doe harvest for those reasons. A lot of the ag grounds that we have in the state are that zone 2 and zone 7 for our antlerless deer. And they're the most liberal, deer zones that we have as far as antlerless harvest goes. So that change that happened, it would have been like 2018, 2019, we added a deer to the rifle and muzzleloader bag limit for that zone 2, 7, and 8. So that was in response to deer populations getting higher than what's acceptable. And there are two different kinds of what we call carrying capacity. So from a biological side, you have a carrying capacity of like this habitat type, this area, and you can make it whatever you want, 40 acres, 80 acres, 10,000 acres, whatever it is. This is how many deer can live here at a max. That's, biological carrying capacity. But then we also have to consider something called social carrying capacity. So how many deer are farmers, ranchers, HOAs? I mean, you insert whatever here, how many deer are they willing to put up with? So again, there's kind of it's all a big cloth that's kind of interwoven with each other, where there are a lot of different things that you have to consider when you're making changes like that. So again, I kind of rambled on there for a minute, but to answer your question, I don't see that happening in the near future. Now, as we continue to expand, metropolitan areas further and further, could it become a problem? Possibly. But again, that's something where we're already promoting doe harvest pretty heavily. And I mean, it seems to be, we're kind of at a maintenance point with our deer herd.
So I want to kind of step back. You said, we're talking about drought, and this is a myth I've heard a couple people say. I don't know anything behind it, but they say a drought will make a deer wider. Is there anything behind that, or is that something that their grandpa told them and they've gone on with it for generations?
That's campfire talk, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of
Now drought can impact antler quality.
Yeah.
But it's not going to impact shape of rat. Yeah, it's not going to have any. That's all going to be genetic.
Yeah, I was like, because from my experience, the drought's never done any good for my bigger deer. Like an 8-point I shot a couple years ago. The year before, he was a bigger 10-point, and then he dropped his crab claws and dropped size because we were in a bad drought. So I was never seen it, but I wanted to.
Yeah, he just didn't have the nutrition to put on that same amount of antler as he did the year before.
So and then you're talking about deer numbers, and I think about a lot of issues with, like, I see in like people's fishing ponds and all that. If you get too many numbers, it stunts their growth. Is that something deer can do once there's too many that can stunt their own growth?
Yeah, not necessarily from a body standpoint, but definitely when you're looking at antlers, there are 3 things that go into growing antlers. It's age, nutrition, and genetics. 2 of those things we have an impact on, or can have an impact on, and then there's genetics. And genetics is essentially like the glass ceiling of how big that deer can possibly be, given he has really good nutrition and he's given the chance to grow up as far as reach maturity. So that carrying capacity that we talked about a little bit earlier, is how many can survive here and stay alive. Now, when we're focusing things more towards antler development, there's only so much nutrition on the landscape that's available for these deer. Whether you're just in your woods, in your pastures, if you guys are supplementally feeding, there's only so much nutrition to go around. So as you add more and more and more deer onto that landscape, that's essentially a smaller piece of pie for each one of those deer. So it can have an impact, which is why, antlerless harvest is very important in regards to not only overall deer management, but if you're really focusing on trophy management, keeping those antlerless deer down allows more of that nutrition on the landscape to be available to your bucks.
So we got this question in on a live a while back, and a guy asked, and he said, is it better to shoot an older doe or a younger doe? Is there he's as a management standpoint, is there any difference?
No. So the only real difference there, usually the first year that a doe is bred, she's only going to have a single fawn. Every year after that, twins, if not trips, every year. So if you are solely focusing on trying to keep your population at whatever level you have deemed fit as a manager, I would shoot does that are 2.5 or older, because that's reducing the chance of having 3 deer down the road, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. But as far as good or better, I mean, it's a drop in the bucket. It's not going to make a whole bunch of a difference shooting an old one versus a young one.
What about time of year?
Say that again, Hunter.
What about like time of year? Because I've heard people argue about, shoot a doe earlier or shoot a doe later. Like
There's a couple ways to approach that. Some people, especially people that are focusing on killing one specific deer, they go in with the mindset of, I don't want to booger this place up by shooting does. And, I don't want to go in there on October 1 and shoot a doe and tromp around in my woods and possibly impact that buck. So that's one mindset to it. The other mindset is get them out of there before the rut starts. That way that buck is not having to run near as far to cover does. So that's kind of another reason why, antlerless harvest is important. And this is a big revolving door. It just is it's a complicated process, and I'm trying my best to describe this to where everybody can kind of understand. So, a doe that is bred just 1 month later than peak rut. So, 28 days is their cycle, their cycle for ovulation. So, peak of the rut in the state of Oklahoma, November 8th to November 14th. That's when our peak is. A doe that's bred just 28 days later, her fawn is then dropped on the ground 28 days later than the bulk of them, right? So it takes 2.5 years for that fawn to catch back up to the rest of her cohort that she was born with, if that makes sense. So they're trying to play catch up just because they were born a month later. And essentially that boils down to there are so many does that they can't all be bred during that first cycle. And that can continue for 2 or 3 cycles, where I'm sure, there are a lot of people that say, I saw deer chasing in January. Yeah, that's probably true. Tell me about, what you think your buck to doe ratio is. Oh, well, man, I go look at my wheat field and there'll be 110 does on it, and there's only 10 or 12 bucks. And you go, well, yeah, that paints a pretty good picture as far as what's going on. So, and I say all that to say that, that 2.5 years that it takes for them to catch up is they're constantly having to play catch up, where they could be putting nutrition towards skeletal development. And then everything after 2.5 years is going towards antler development. So, and from the buck standpoint, that buck is having to run November, December, January into February, trying to cover does that keep coming back into cycle. Well, he goes into antler development in terrible shape.
Right.
And the first thing that they're trying to do is get their body back in shape. So all of that good green up that's happening in March and April, when we've got really high nutritional value on the landscape, instead of it going into developing antlers, it's going into repairing their body.
Yeah.
So that's kind of why antlerless deer harvest is important from a trophy management or, a quality deer management mindset.
And that's, you can tell me I'm totally wrong if I am, but that's something that we've tried to stress or tell people is, a key that we feel is impacted what we've done is start feeding mineral right around rut, because you want that deer to be able to, and we've seen it from having like gravity feeds, like those deer know when it's there and when they need it. And they've come up and hit it, and then you won't see them hit it. They'll come eat the corn or whatever, and then they'll go. It's like when they know they need it, they go get it. And something we've been seeing throughout the years, and Gunner's dad is one that taught me this. And it's exactly what you just said. It's like you're wanting the deer to be able to not have to be in that recovery mode. Mm-hmm. So you need a lot of people think you need to supplement feed deer in the spring and summer. And sometimes, that's great, but that's a lot of times when there's natural supplements out there with the grasses that are coming up, especially early spring. And that's something that we try to tell people that's kind of helped us in our deer growth, is starting really pouring the supplements out right around rut and keep pushing all the way through February is the most important key parts. Is that something that's true, or is that something that's...
I've always been of the mindset that if I can make it where that deer's not even having to run himself to death, mm-hmm. I'm going to choose that option first.
Right.
I'm gonna get my deer herd under control as far as buck to doe ratio goes, and then I'm gonna pour the coals to them from February to August. If I'm on a budget and my goal is to grow bigger deer, I'm going to focus a lot of my efforts on that February to August timeframe, just because during the rut, the last thing on those bucks' minds is, you know what? I'm lacking a little bit of calcium today, so I'm
Yeah.
going to go over here to this gravity feeder that I know about. They got one thing on their mind. You know, they're boys at the bar. They're heading
Right.
out for one thing and one thing only. So if I can get my herd under control to where my bucks are not having to run for 4 months, that recovery period is so much shorter, and I can really pour the coals to them during antler development, because it doesn't do
Yeah.
us any good to feed protein. I always laugh when people are feeding protein in like October. That always makes me chuckle, because it's like, man, that ship sailed a long time ago
Yeah.
as far as antler development goes. Now, a lot of people do it just because they like to get pictures and you know, keep inventory on their deer. More power to you, but don't tell me it's because you're trying to grow bigger antlers.
Right.
And that's always been the principle. Typically we've started like January, middle of January into February. That's always been kind of the mindset, is try to, you know, get them as healthy as possible, so everything, you know, they can fix themselves and then just go boom.
Yep.
That's always been what the theory we've always tried to do.
You nailed it. Yeah.
Yeah.
You nailed it.
Yeah.
And that's,
It's that, who was the old ad for, it was like a feed company or a food plot company where it's like bigger bucks, healthier deer, and they'd like get in a fight with each other over who was right.
yeah.
It's bigger bucks, healthier deer.
Was it biologic?
Maybe, but it's all the same. Like,
Yeah.
healthier deer, it's just a circle. Like, bigger bucks equal healthier deer, which equal bigger bucks, which equal healthier deer. And I mean, it's just, as long as you can get that herd in a spot where your bucks aren't having to run all over the place, that's the best way to start.
Yeah. And it's been kind of cool to watch that at our places. You know, I kind of took, my dad has done a lot of research, and I've done, you know, I've learned from him a lot. But then hearing, you know, Steve's side, Gunner's dad's side, is, you know, everyone has their own opinions and views, but learning his side and taking, you know, what I saw work with what me and my dad have done, like in our area, like some of our younger deer, and even all of our deer, but I'm saying like with them not having to go in recovery mode, like what they've done in a year has been unreal. I mean, we have this year alone, we've had some of the biggest 2.5 and 3.5-year-old deer that I have ever seen at a place I hunt.
It makes it awful hard to pass them, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, there's 2 deer in particular that I'm just like, I cannot wait what they do, but I only think they're going to be 3.5, 4.5, which 4.5 is mature to some people. It is mature by, you know, biological standpoint, but I'm trying to get 5.5, if not 6.5, 7.5 and older. But it's just crazy to see, you know, went from torn down deer always recovering to move into, you know, more of this method, and what they've done has been unreal. Like
I mean, and then you throw into consideration, you know, the part of the state you guys are in, you've been blessed with rain.
Absolutely.
And that's been a huge factor over the last 3 or 4 years. You know, most of the east side of the state has been pretty blessed with rain. So even though you guys are supplementally feeding, you've got a buffet of pretty high quality stuff out there.
Right.
So that's something that, you know, those are the things that really just kind of take it over the top, where you've got those years where, like, I mean, exactly what you're describing, you know, years where bucks are going to put on 30 inches in between years.
Yeah. I can definitely say I'm excited for this year. We potentially have some young deer that are going to be real. But off that topic, you know, you're talking a lot about not letting your bucks run, not let them get to that point. So what, in your opinion, and what you've researched, what's the correct ratio?
Yep, that's a great question, and it can change just based on a fence line. So all growing up, you know, watching hunting shows, reading, you know, all of these magazines, you hear everybody talk about like a 1-to-1 ratio. That's impossible to do. On a free range deer herd, you are spitting in the ocean trying to get that to be right. If you have 1,000 acres, that's kind of the typical home range for a deer in Oklahoma. It's about 1,000 acres. And that's going to be, again, that's a law of averages in biology and in wildlife management, everything is about that kind of law of averages. So I already know there's listeners that are going, oh man, I got a buck that doesn't leave 5 acres. Well, that's a great individual anecdote for that data
Yeah.
set. But the general is about 1,000 acres. If you can get that in that 3-to-1, 4-to-1 ratio, you're doing a pretty dang good job.
Yeah, because I think about a couple properties that I have, and I'm like a 1-to-1. Like I'd have to call a lot of friends over to get to that point. Because
Yeah, exactly. And with ingress and egress, from neighboring properties, it's something that you're never going to be able to achieve. So,
yeah,
I'm big on setting achievable goals. Like if I told you guys I want to weigh 150 pounds in October, like that's not an achievable goal, dude. I weigh 210 pounds right now. Like we're
I
not
feel that.
we're not going to do that. But if I tell myself, hey, I'd like to weigh 195 pounds by October, like
Yeah.
that's doable. So I always have that same approach when I'm talking with landowners of let's set a goal that we can accomplish. A, because it's a step in the right direction, and B, it makes you feel good to accomplish a goal. So that 3 to 4 to 1 ratio is kind of where I tell people is a pretty good sweet spot.
And for someone that doesn't listen, we're talking buck to doe ratio. And a lot of people took that in as when people are talking about ratios, it's a mature buck, like 1 mature buck to 3 does. And that's not right. You're talking about overall, right?
The overall ratio. It doesn't matter if it's a 1.5-year-old buck or an 8.5-year-old buck. A buck is a buck is a buck when we're talking about buck to doe ratios.
Yeah, I saw that on a Facebook post the other day. So I was like, well, I'm going to help clear that guy's thoughts up.
Let's take a break from this podcast and talk about some awesome products.
Hey folks, let me tell you about GritKnives. They're not just your average knife company. They're all about high quality, affordable, and unique products that'll make your outdoor adventures legendary. From limited edition pocket knives to rugged fixed blades and precision scalpels, they've got it all. Plus, their logo wear will have you repping the brand wherever you go. So whether you're out in the field or tackling everyday tasks, trust GritKnives to be your go-to for top-notch gear that won't break the bank.
Are you looking for some of the best sounding turkey calls on the market? Then look no farther than JAG Calls. Since 2022, Team OD has been using their calls and have had great success doing so. Two of my personal favorite calls are the Mother Clucker and the America. And I mean, if it has a name like that, it must be good. Check out JAG Calls, that's JAG Calls, out at jagcalls.com. Hey, and while you're at checkout, use OD 2024 for a discount. Once again, OD 2024 for your discount.
Now let's get back to today's episode.
Yeah. So overall, you think Oklahoma, like we're turning to you said it's the glory days, but do you think we're going to continue to progress with the not knowing what the unknowns of sickness or anything like that coming in?
Yeah, I mean, I think that more and more people are becoming mindful of deer management on the place they hunt, whether they lease it, whether they own it, whether it's public land. I mean, people are starting to adopt that, letting young bucks grow, things like that. So, I say glory days just because that's what you hear all the old quail hunters and all the old duck hunters talk about. Oh man, back in the 90s, blah, 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 blah. I think that's what a lot of people will refer to, 40 years from now is, man, do you remember when that mid 20 teens when we started really seeing some quality deer showing up? And I think that, we're early in the story for that. I think there's a lot of room to grow, but I mean, it's hard to beat deer hunting in Oklahoma right now.
Right. And, cruising through Facebook, you see certain pages. I think I'm going to revert my words on that, but they have seen something that they think will work without anything behind it. I'm trying to word it very nicely. And, I've gone through there. I am a part of some of those pages just to see what people say.
Oh, it's a circus. I love it.
Yeah, it's the whole circus act. And, and a lot of these pages are pushing for a $1 state. And, and I'll let you talk before I say my next comment. But do you ever see Oklahoma going to $1 state? And with that, what's behind it, if it will or if it won't?
Yeah, I mean, everything that we need to make a decision like that on is based on data. And, a lot of the people say, oh, there's so many people that are killing $2. So we'll play a fun game. What percent of hunters do you guys think kill $2 a year in the state of Oklahoma?
I think it's low because I don't know too many
How
people.
low?
I can personally tell you I haven't killed $2 in years.
Okay.
So
I'm guessing like 15, 20%.
Okay. Gunner?
I'll just play devil's advocate. We'll go either 8.
4%.
Oh, wow.
So is this a perception issue or is this an actual problem?
Mm-hmm.
So it's one of those deals where it's like, man, why try to fix something that's not broken?
Right.
And, another thing that we have to take into consideration, and we'll keep playing our game here. So let's say next year I wave my wand, Oklahoma's a $1 state, and you go out on October the 1st and you kill the target buck you've been watching all summer long. Are you going to go out and shoot does at all for the rest of the year?
Me personally, probably 1 or 2, just because that's what I do. But I don't
you
think
will be in the extreme minority.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. I don't think after
Every
that.
other person is dusting off the decoys and they're duck hunting the rest of the year. So from a statewide management standpoint, we need people to harvest antlerless deer. And that second buck tag is a carrot. It's a carrot in front of the horse. People want an opportunity to shoot a buck or they do not go hunting.
Absolutely.
And you can see that in participation rates and application rates. We're fixing to find out who all drew hunts today or tomorrow. You see that in the application rate for antlerless only hunts. Those antlerless only hunts, if you want a slam dunk draw a tag hunt, put in for that Cherokee antlerless only deer hunt. Because there's only if there's 60 tags that are available, there's 61 people that put in for it. I mean, so it's one of those deals where, the proof's in the pudding in regards to what people's level of participation would be if we went to a $1 state from a deer management standpoint.
Right. And you can back me on this too. This is me having an opinion that I've kind of researched. But or you can back me or shoot me down, whatever way. I don't. But in my opinion, a lot of these, you read a lot of people say, well, look at Ohio, look at Kansas, look at that. But earlier we talked about genetics.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't feel like Oklahoma has the genetics of what we're seeing in Ohio, what we're seeing. Kansas has moved down, in my opinion. Throughout the years, you're seeing a lot more deer farther north of Oklahoma and kind of towards the mid that kind of resemble what you would call a Kansas genetic in body and rack size. But I don't think Oklahoma consistently can produce those 200-inch deer that you're seeing coming out of Ohio. And I think a lot of people are, like you said earlier, shooting for goals that we're not going to reach right now.
We don't have the habitat quality that those states have.
Right.
We don't have the soil quality that those states have. I mean, have you been to Iowa? Have any of you been to Iowa or Ohio?
I have driven through.
Even just driving through it, right? Like you look at that
Iowa.
soil and dude, that stuff is like black. I mean, like black, rich soil. And then you come out here and you go to, I don't know, just for fun, we could say Moreland, Oklahoma, where you can't kick dirt off the ground because it is so hard and clay and red, nasty soil. So, I mean, you're really comparing apples to oranges. What works in Kansas works in Kansas. What works in Ohio works in Ohio. But it's something where you can't manage deer here like you manage deer there, just like they can't manage deer there like we can here. I mean, when you're looking at the number of quality, I would put Oklahoma up against anybody right now in regards to, quality deer that are getting shot. Because a fun thing you also have to think about, and I'm sure you guys know just as many people like this as I do. I know guys that kill hammers every single year, and they don't tell anybody, and
Yeah.
they don't even put it into a scorebook or nothing. The only way you know they kill big deer is because A, they either trust you enough to tell you, or you happen to see them with their blinds open on their house when you drove by, and boy howdy, it looked
Yeah.
like a Cabela's in there.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's arguments for it and arguments against it, but at this point where we're at with our deer management, I don't think we biologically we don't warrant needing to go to a $1 state.
You think if we ever did, you think they would do something like not? I don't know if we'd ever go to $1. I don't know if we'd ever have enough push from one side to get it to $1. I just don't. Do you think they'd ever do something like you can shoot one deer with a quote unquote gun, so like muzzleloader or rifle, and then the other deer has to be archery? You think they'd ever
Yeah, I
do
mean,
something like that?
I think that's a lot lower hanging fruit to go for. Like instead of mashing the gas pedal and just cutting everybody's legs out from underneath them and saying we're going $1, there are other ways to kind of manage that way. And I mean, these are conversations we have every year. I mean, every year there's legislation that's, legislators are calling us asking, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And we're having the same conversations that you and I got, that we're having right here on here's what we can do. Here's what we probably shouldn't do just from a data standpoint. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of that hybrid model that I see that being a lot more probable than going full bore, a $1 limit.
Yeah, and I've told Gunnar this numerous times. Like if we ever did, I think something to look or something I would be for if we had to go to one, or start limiting stuff would be like what we did with turkeys. Like one, you could shoot two, but they had to be from two different counties,
Yeah.
And a lot of people, everyone's like, well, the online check-in is, people would hide it and this and that. But my whole theory is
I got an opinion on that.
Yeah, let's hear that, and then we'll go into what I was going to say.
If sketchy people are going to be sketchy, it does not matter what the check-in method is. People burn me up about you killed the tradition of deer hunting by getting rid of check stations, man. It was a tradition unlike any other, like they're talking about the masters. And people that aren't going to check their deer, they're not going to check their deer whether if you have to bring it to me or you don't.
Yeah.
So, and another thing is people stopped going. Like whenever we went to online check, there's nothing that said you can't go to, mom and pop gas station and kick it with all the guys and drink coffee and show your deer off. They stopped doing it because it was required to do it.
Yeah.
So if it was that big of a tradition and you've got heartburn over it that bad, why did you stop going? Oh, because it's just because it's easier to just drive to the house and check it in. There you go.
Yeah, that's well. I was going with that is, there's a lot of people in the state. No, I shouldn't say a lot. Maybe I'm a rare one. Maybe Gunner's a rare one too. But we work our tails off at all of our properties, and some of my properties are in the same county, but majority of them aren't. They're touching or they're in other counties. They're 40, 50 miles, maybe 60 miles away from the other one in some circumstances. So I'm working my tail off, and I have an opportunity at two big deer. I don't want to be punished, and it's not really punished. Like if it needs to happen, it needs to happen. But if it doesn't, I'm like, why? I want to be able to harvest both of those. And a lot of people, you see on Facebook, they're like, well, you don't need to harvest two deer. You need to do this and that. And it just blows my mind that's what the mindset is.
My question on that is why?
Yeah. If I have two 6.5+ year old deer, why not?
Mm-hmm.
And in my term, or back to my management standpoint, that's the ideal situation. Every year to be able to shoot 6.5-year-old deer or 6.5+, like that's ideal. And if we can do that, why do we need to change it?
Mm-hmm.
So that's my spill on that. Another thing I've seen a lot of is people talking about moving, like get rifle away from rut,
Okay.
shorten rifle, do this. make primitive more primitive, take scopes off. You hear all that. And I see some of like the primitive side, like especially with
Some of the
maybe
stuff now is getting pretty bananas.
yeah, I was like, some of these muzzleloaders I've been seeing there's no difference between them and a rifle. But anyways, from a ways from that, let's start with, do you ever see like rifle season? Do you see it affecting enough to be pushed back away from the rut or being as close to the rut as it is?
No, so I mean, again, every decision we make has got data to back it, right? So you heard me mention that the peak of the rut in Oklahoma, November 8th to November 14th. All of that data is part of a project that I work on. It's called our herd health evaluation. So every year in February, we go out on willing landowners' property and we sample a whole bunch of does. By that time, all those does have been bred. So they've got a little fetus in them, right? So we can take that fetus and we can measure it and we can backdate it based on the length of that fetus. I can tell you the day that fetus was conceived, like to the day. So that all that rut data is just a big bell curve, right? So on the left-hand side, it's kind of low and it's starting to go up, and then it peaks out at the top, and then it drifts back down to no conception happening. That very top of that curve is November 8th to the 14th. So that is, let me think about how this. So that is after muzzleloader has ended on almost every year. It should be on every year. And then it has, the peak of the rut has stopped before rifle has started. So from a biological standpoint, we're not hunting in the peak of the rut. Now, are you going to probably see some rutting activity? Yeah, because you've got that whole other side of the bell curve that's still there. So it's kind of a happy medium between, we're protecting bucks during the peak of the rut, but we're also providing hunters with a good hunting experience, kind of catching that tail of the rut. And now with the way that our season is set is, it's not by what day it is. It's deer gun season in Oklahoma starts the Saturday before Thanksgiving. So that moves a little bit with how the calendar falls out for that month. So some years it creeps up there, November 18th, boy, we're knocking on the door. And then other years it's, November 26th, and pretty much everything's done, but you're still going to see some of that. And especially if you have, back to the buck to doe ratio deal, if you've got a pretty wonky set going, you're going to see that secondary rut or even tertiary rut in some areas. So there's a biological reason for why it is when it is. And there's also, we talked about managing from a biology standpoint and managing from what's socially accepted. The tradition of deer hunting and Thanksgiving is rooted very, very, very deep in this state. So, you move it to December, like let's say we go full Kansas on them and we're going to go to December, there would be torches and pitchforks at that door right there of people saying, you took away my family tradition of Thanksgiving deer hunting with my kids on our farm. So, I mean, you're juggling a lot of balls when it comes to that. But as far as, rut timing and rifle season, I don't see it changing.
Yeah. I hadn't really thought of it that way. The Thanksgiving tradition, a part of it. That's something I hadn't really thought about. I've always been.
I mean, and that's funny is like, coming out of school, here you are, you're classically trained in wildlife management, and science is the only thing that matters. And boy, do you ever get a dose of reality when it comes to politics and social standards and these other dynamics that they don't teach you nothing about in school. They don't teach you anything about that. How much that carries a pretty big club when it comes to wildlife management, and you see that happening in other states. I mean, like, look at what Colorado did with the wolf reintroduction. Every biologist they have in that state was like, this is a bad idea. And Denver, Colorado metro area said, you guys don't know what you're talking about. We're going to vote this across. So the jury's still out on what's going to happen to the elk over in Colorado. But boy, if you're a hunter, I'd buy my tag now and try to get over there and get one, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah, and we've talked about this on several podcasts. Like, there's a reason why we have biologists, and there's a reason why we have trash guys. There's a reason why we have, everyone has a place, and they're important for their place. And I don't want a biologist to make the trash route. You know what I mean? I don't want the trash guy to tell me to let wolves go. I don't want, and that's why everyone has their place. And it's crazy that one little area can tell the other 3/4 of the state, we're going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's what, I kind of see the $1 deal in Oklahoma. That's what it's a lot of ideas that have no data to back it.
Mm-hmm.
And in what these people say, they're, the reasoning you're seeing behind it is, well, you shouldn't want to eat $2. You should want to do this. I'm like, what? The data shows it doesn't matter. We don't need to make it more commercialized.
Yeah.
I
mean, I always fall back on the deal of that 4% number, is it's like, this is not a problem.
Yeah.
What you're seeing is solely because people can post about it now. If social media wasn't a thing, you wouldn't even know that there were some people that did kill $2.
Yeah.
It's like tagged out. That's what you see all the time. Tagged out in Oklahoma. And you're looking at a very, very small representative of deer hunters in Oklahoma that do that.
Yeah.
So until that number becomes a problem, that's the data that I tend to lean on.
Yeah. You actually came and spoke. You talked a lot about this $1 stuff. I don't know if you remember. You came and spoke at my game management species class, Chitwood's class.
Sue, or was it with Coulter?
It was with Coulter.
Okay.
You came. I was in the back of that class. You talked a lot about this $1. Somebody asked about it.
The little nerd in the back.
I did not ask
his head
about
down
it.
and was sleeping.
Yeah.
No, I remember it because
He'd
my
been out on
picture
the strip the night before. It's no big
my
deal.
picture was on your slide, and I was like, "Hey, that's me." But it was like right after I killed my buck. It was like right after that. That spring, you were like there, and I was like, "Oh, that's cool." But you had talked about the doe thing that you talked about how people wouldn't shoot does.
Mm-hmm.
And I on Facebook talk about these groups that we're part of, and they were going on and on about the $1. I didn't name drop anybody, but I messaged them. I was like, "This is what I've heard. I just wanted to see what they said," and they were like, "That's such a cop out."
You can't tell those people anything. I mean, they've got the biggest blinders on for, my way or the highway. And that's something that, we as professional biologists, those are the people that you can't let them crawl under your skin. The first year or two working this job, it bothered me. I would stare at the ceiling at night trying to fall asleep, thinking about just people. I mean, people are just trashing you. They don't know they're trashing you because they have no idea who I am. But like, when you see that stuff, you're just like, you don't even know me, man. Like,
yeah,
I'm a pretty good guy. Like I get along with just about anybody. And man, there's people that are just flaming you, and you just got to eat it. I mean, you can't retaliate on stuff like that because it gives them the power. But yeah, it's there. We call armchair biologists is what we call that. There's a lot of those around.
He went on to say that it's the same reason we don't move back rifle season is because they all say we're going to kill them all in the wheat fields. Is what he said, or something like that. I don't know. He just started talking about wanting to move rifle season back, which I love hunting rifle season on Thanksgiving. It's one of my favorite things ever. If we did, I don't see us moving season ever. If we ever did, it wouldn't. I'm just one of those people. It's like, oh, make it. I don't care if it's a little harder, if that makes sense. That's my thing.
Yeah.
I would not want to take away that you mentioned that. I never thought about the Thanksgiving thing. That meant that much to a lot of people. Now I've always hunted it, but it wasn't always a thing where I was like, I gotta get out there,
Mm-hmm.
This is a whatever, but you know what I'm saying. That's just something cool that you had mentioned I had never thought of.
I have a property up north, and I've hunted it since probably 2006, 2005. Me and my brother and dad have hunted it. And the neighbors across the way, I mean, hunting or opening morning and throughout that weekend, I mean, talking about an army of people rolling out, and they have like 240 acres. In the first few years we were hunting it, we're trying to manage it, you hear all the shots, and you're just like sitting there, oh, they probably, but as the time went, you learned it's a tradition for them. Like that's what makes them happy.
Yep.
And it's so cool to see it because I mean, still today, I like to go out there with my dad and brother opening morning. It's kind of our tradition, and just for one of my favorite stands, you can hear them or see their tail lights going through their pastures, and I just laugh because some days you'll see like 5 or 6 vehicles. Some days I've seen like 10. It's just been hilarious. But yeah, that's a big thing. I feel like people get, and we're going in talking about this, like what you see on Facebook is a small, or any social media is a small percentage of people that want this. I think there's always going to be a bigger percentage that
The squeaky wheel is always going to be the loudest one.
yes,
And
exactly.
I think that there are people that I always have to tell myself at the end of the day, my job as a biologist is to ensure that, my grandchildren and their grandchildren have the ability to deer hunt.
Mhm.
Now, what that looks like, I don't know. I don't think any of us will know. But the whole like arguing over what's best or who's got the best ideas or $1 or $2 or $5 or any of that stuff, at the end of the day, it just really doesn't matter.
Yeah.
We got to manage our deer the best we can for healthy deer, and whatever that is what we will fight to do, and that's the best that we can do.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of people comment saying, Oklahoma's headed to be like the Nebraska, where the deer numbers are doing horrible, and I'm like, I don't really feel that's true either. I mean, everything you see, it backs it.
Just because they're not seeing deer, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the last 3 years we've had so much rain that you can't see 30 feet in front of you in a lot of places. So, I mean, visibility's down. I had a lot of people calling, kind of freaking out about this last year. Man, all my deer are gone. I don't know what's happening. All my deer are gone. And I kind of had to walk them through that. And it's like, for some odd reason, that's not something people think about. It's like,
Yeah.
your visibility on your farm is a quarter of what it was the year before. When your Johnson grass is 14 feet tall and the greenbrier is an impenetrable wall, like go tell your buddy to walk 15 feet into the woods and tell me if you can see him or not.
Like that match.
And they're like, oh man, I didn't think about that. And you're just like,
Yeah.
Guys, they'll say that, and then I'll say, have you looked at the deer harvest totals? Well, no. I said, man, we're right on pace with where we were the year before.
Yeah.
Oh, so maybe it's a you problem.
Right.
Maybe you smoking cigarettes in your blind is probably not the best idea, or slamming your car doors, or there's a lot of stuff that people do that they don't realize is an issue.
Absolutely.
But it is. So there's that.
So let's kind of break away from that. And, a lot of people, I'm kind of glad to see it just for the state as myself. But what's the reason why we raised the deer tags this year, the prices?
Yeah. So, I'm sure a lot of our listeners saw that, especially if they're a non-resident listener. We went where it was $300. That got you whatever your method tag was. And that came with all of your deer tags, and that included your hunting license was kind of wrapped up in that, where you didn't necessarily have to purchase a non-resident hunting license. This next year, going into effect July 1, it's going to be a little bit different, where those method licenses are $500 per method. That still includes, the bag limit of deer that would be allowed with that method, but they're also going to have to purchase a non-resident deer license as well, or non-resident hunting license, excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
So that brings that total, up over, what was it, like $700, $710, I think is what it comes out to be after all the stuff's added together. And a lot of people, that's some sticker shock. That's 100 and something % increase from the last year. We do not receive any tax dollars with the Department of Wildlife. So we're solely funded on license sales, donations, oil and gas leases that are on RWMAs, and then ag production. And those last two are very small, drop in the bucket kind of stuff. And we had not had a license fee increase since the early 2000s.
Wow.
So, I mean, you and I and everybody, right here in our conversation and your listeners know, like, the cost of doing anything now is not what it was in 2002.
Right. Absolutely.
The cost to do anything has skyrocketed. So we have been running a 2024 ops budget on 2002 income. And, we don't get to set those prices. That is something that has to be passed through legislature. So we made the recommendation and we've fought for it for a long time. It's just not been something that our representatives have seen as necessary. And I think that message finally got across, and here we are. We've just kind of finally caught up to the rest of the country in regard to non-resident deer hunting.
No kidding.
So the price of residents. So this is when I'm not exactly the expert on this. It's one of my self-admitted flaws. I've had a lifetime since I was 15 years old. So I've never had to purchase a license for anything in my whole entire life. So keeping up with, what resident pricing is on stuff, I don't really, feel like I'm the one to talk about it. I do know it went up a little bit for them, but it just includes tags. So they're still in pretty good shape when it comes to being able to harvest deer. But it was really just about kind of catching up with the times. We see ourselves as a top 5 whitetail destination state here in Oklahoma, and we feel like we should ask the same entry price as the rest of those states that feel the same way.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, there is a reason, and I'm not hating on them. I love let me phrase that. I love most of our neighbors, but like, you're seeing a lot of Texas tags come here, and Texas like license plate come here, and you if you talk to them, they're like, it's cheaper to hunt here than it is our own state.
Yeah, that DFW money goes a long way up here, especially when the price of leasing ground in Texas is astronomical. I mean, you're looking $25 to $40 an acre to lease something. I mean, the closer you get to the DFW metro, the higher it's going to be. Or they can just hop right over the Red River and they can pay $15, $16, $17 an acre, and it just goes a heck of a lot further for them.
And have better sports teams and better deer. But that's besides the point. Just kidding. No, but yeah, it's crazy just to see it. And a lot of people, it's funny to see them complain about it. But if you take that number, divide it about how many tags you get, that's really not that much once you divide it in all the tags.
If you're an archery hunter, that's Barganza Central still. I mean, it was astronomical when it was $300, and now when you look at it, I mean, you're still $103 and $102.25 a deer, which is pretty cheap.
Yeah, go do that anywhere else.
And it'll be interesting to see how a lot of that shakes out. We've got projections on what that can mean for, license sales and what basically who that's priced out of situations. I'm not sure how much impact it'll have on the people that lease. A lot of the people that lease are driving over here in a $90,000 diesel, and they're hauling a $30,000 side-by-side. And in the bed of that side-by-side is a $3,000 pallet of protein pellets, and I'm not sure that a $500 increase for them is going to weasel them out. What you will see is probably a reduction in public land use by non-residents, which I don't think any of our residents are going to complain about. A great example of that, deer rifle opener at Black Kettle. This last year, there were like 356 trucks in that parking lot, or the various parking lots across that whole area. It's 35,000 acres. It's quilted all across that country to where you can spread out. But it was like something like 70 or 80% of those were non-resident license plates.
Wow.
So, I mean, I think it will help reduce a little bit of that to where our residents will see a little better quality hunt on some of our wildlife management areas.
Yeah, and I see it as I maybe, like I said, I might be speaking out of line, but I kind of see that as if someone's going to come over here, and pay that a little bit more, and you're doing a management program, I feel like they might look at maybe getting a little bit bigger deer. You know what I mean? And I feel like that's all in all, from
Yeah.
my standpoint, a better deal. Like, and I want to clear this up once again. I do shoot does for meat. Like, I do all that. I just love to shoot mature deer because that's what I live for. So, but I could see an uptick in that.
Yeah, it'll make you think about filling some tags when you're paying that much money for them.
So, kind of to wrap this whole podcast up, it's a hot topic. A lot of people have their opinions about it. There's a lot of out of state based platforms posting about it, and at CWD in Oklahoma. So, if you will, kind of go over what it is. Why is Oklahoma worrying about it now, and some prevention plans for Oklahoma.
Yeah, so chronic wasting disease is a difficult one for a lot of people to understand because it is not a virus, it is not a bacteria. Those are things that we're pretty familiar with. CWD is a prion disease. Now, a prion is an intercellular protein, and everyone has prions inside of their cells. Deer, people, monkeys, everything has got prions inside of it. But chronic wasting disease impacts just that cervid family. So deer, elk, moose, caribou, things that are in that family Cervidae. It's an always fatal neurological disease. So what happens there is those prions misfold. They pick up a infectious prion either from another deer or from off of the landscape. That's another thing with this prion. When it's out in the air, in the open, it can exist in the environment for decades. So that deer will pick up an infectious prion, and it basically convinces all of the other prions inside of that deer's body that it should look like me. You should be folded like I am. So it's harbored in that central nervous system. And the best way to describe it, the technical term for that family, it's called a TSE, a transmissible spongiform encephalopathy. So to whittle all the big words out of that and kind of boil it down, transmissible meaning that it can be passed from deer to deer, spongiform meaning causes holes, and encephalopathy means of the brain. So this is a transmissible disease that causes holes in your brain. Again, like I said, it's always fatal 100% of the time. So no matter what a deer does, if they are positive for CWD, they are going to die. There's no way for them to live from this. The biggest factor here, and I say all that to say there's a lot about this disease that we still don't know. In the disease world, it's still a relatively novel disease. Things like the flu have been around for hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of years. CWD was discovered in the mid 60s on the Wyoming-Colorado border. So, we're only looking at 80 years of knowing what this even is. So there's still a lot of research to be done, but the biggest concern is jumping that species barrier. Of it jumping into humans. There are some human versions of TSEs, that same family. So Creutzfeldt-Jakob's disease is one, and then Kuru is the name of another one. I'll let you, if there's anybody nerdy enough to look that stuff up that's listening, I'll let you Google that stuff. But the problem is that, it's always fatal. So it's not like blue tongue. It's not like EHD where it kind of comes in waves. We talked a little bit about that herd health evaluation a little while ago. One thing we do during that is we take a blood sample and we spin that down into serum and we send it off to the lab. And it tells us what all osises these deer are walking around with. And blue tongue and EHD are one of the ones that we look for. And about 85 to 90% of our deer have got antibodies for both of those diseases, meaning that they're either exposed to it in utero or they have caught it and they survived. So they're building up a resistance to that. There is no resistance for chronic wasting disease that we know of or that's been, scientifically proven. So what does all that mean? In Oklahoma, for the longest time, the only cases that we had were in a very small handful of high fence facilities. And those were handled by the USDA, the Department of Agriculture, were the overseers in those situations. But let's see, last summer we had our first case of CWD pop up in Oklahoma and wild deer. That was over in Texas County, so way up in the Panhandle. So then not even a month later, we had another positive come out of Woodward County. So between Woodward and Moreland there on 412. So what does that mean? There's not really anything we can do to stop it. We realize that there's no magic dust we can fly over the deer and cure them. There's no cure for a disease like this. So what we can do is mitigate the spread of that as much as humanly possible. So that's why you saw those surveillance areas. We called them an SSA, a selected surveillance area. That's why we established those. And basically what we did, we have a management plan for chronic wasting disease that we have in our pocket to where when stuff like this happens, it's not run around like a chicken with your head cut off. It's not the whole Ricky Bobby, I'm on fire act. It's, hey, here's what we have and here's what we know what we need to do. So draw that SSA, and we're basically trying to limit the movement of carcasses, because that disease is harbored in that central nervous system. So like I said, it can exist for decades. So what we're trying to prevent is, Jim, who's from Tulsa, travels into that area that's known to have CWD. He harvests a deer there. He throws that deer in the back of his truck. He goes back to his house in Tulsa. He cleans that deer on his little farm outside Tulsa and then pitches the carcass out there. Well, now we've introduced infectious prions to Tulsa County. And, that's just a spider web effect that happens there when you start doing that. So a lot of those regulations pertaining to carcass movement are to try to prevent the natural or the unnatural spread of chronic wasting disease across the landscape. We also set up some volunteer drop-off freezers to have your deer tested. That's one thing that, unfortunately, the last 4 or 5 years, a lot of people have lost faith in the CDC. So whenever I tell everyone, the CDC recommends that if you harvest a deer from an area that it's known to have chronic wasting disease, that you should have your deer tested before you consume it, because we don't know if it can transfer into humans or not. There's a lot of science that says that it shouldn't be able to, but like Jurassic Park, nature finds a way.
Yeah.
So it's something just out of caution. Luckily, there were a lot of other states that have dealt with this before we had to. There are a lot of really good examples of what not to do. Wisconsin would be probably at the top of that list. Whenever they first had that stuff going on in the early 2000s, they thought that they could eradicate deer and it would stop the spread of that disease. So they went in and wiped out counties worth of deer in an attempt to stop that, and a lot of people lost their job over it. So that now knowing that it can exist in the landscape, there's no point in doing that.
Right.
So that was kind of the big fear factor. Well, they're trying to kill all of our deer. They're going to come in and wipe out all of our deer. And I mean, I can assure you that that's not what sound management is. It's nowhere in anyone's management practices to be doing anything like that. What you do want to do is try to keep those deer from being overpopulated.
Yeah.
Because it's spread by deer to deer contact. So in areas of really high deer prevalence, in areas of really high deer population, you have a chance for the prevalence rate of that disease to go way up. And so, there are some difficult things with the disease. The first one being that incubation period. So from the time that deer picks up an infectious prion, it's about an 18 to 24 month delay until they're showing clinical symptoms of that disease. So, here we are, we're sitting in our deer blind watching the week, and there's 50 deer out there, and they all look healthy as a horse. There's a good chance that one of those deer could have chronic wasting disease because of that delay in exhibiting symptoms. So that's kind of where we're at. The first year we we didn't have a whole lot of people that, were volunteering their deer to be tested. I think that, anytime that the government comes in and says, hey, here's what you want, we want you to do, there's some skepticism there, and that's understandable. But I think that as we kind of continue to communicate our efforts and what those efforts will be, people will start volunteering to have some of those deer tested to where we can find out what those prevalence rates are in the
Right.
herd.
So there was an article that came out that said they want to start releasing deer. Can you touch on that, or is that something that's kind of?
Yeah, so there was a bill that was passed here during this last legislative session that is wanting to look at genetically modifying deer. Essentially, there's a professor out of Texas A&M University that has found that there is a genome sequence. We're getting way deep into some big nerdy stuff here. So basically, that study has shown that there is a little bit of resistance to catching chronic wasting disease in a couple, certain allele markers on some codons within that genetic makeup. Now, what does that mean? We don't know. They have been successful in building resistance in high fence deer herds.
Mm-hmm.
But what we've been tasked to do is collect some genetic samples from free range deer to see, what possibilities we have for genetic resistance in our natural deer herd. So that's where we're at now. What does that mean 2 or 3 years down the road? I don't know. But that's essentially what you saw. Is there some research that's showing that it is a feasible task in a high fence herd, but they're wanting to see if there's any validity to it from a native deer standpoint.
So is this like a kind of like I guess like a case study type thing, and then if years whatever down the road it seems to work, then the action comes into let's implement it type thing?
Yeah, it's really just dipping your toe in the pond to see kind of what is possible. Now, there's a lot of questions I have that need to be answered before I can support something like that. But I think that's a lot of what this bill is asking us to do is, hey, let's go look at the genetic makeup of our deer herds here, and let's see what it says. So that's where we're at.
So a lot of people were worried that because the bill stated like it was going to happen fast, like they were going to start getting, pretty much released. I want to say it said this year at some point on one of those, and I was like, holy cow! Like,
yeah. So that was kind of the initial verbiage in that bill. Had that in it. It was, hey, here's what we want to do. But we put our heads together and worked with the authors of that bill of like, hey, let's take a step back and let's do some research before we make any decisions. And I think that's where we're at. I mean, that's, like I've said, this whole conversation is, any management decision needs to have data to support.
Absolutely.
And before we make a decision like that, let's build a data set to where we can find out, hey, is this something that we even need to do? I mean, because what if we come back and that genetic makeup is showing, a high rate of our deer having those alleles that they've found are more resistant. Now, what does that resistance mean? I don't really know. Because they don't quite know yet. Like I said, there's a lot of research that needs to be done. Some of the stuff I've read says that it just takes them a little bit longer to catch it, and then it takes them a little bit longer to die from it. So if that's what it is, that's a little scarier in my opinion, because here we are, they can be shedding that prion on the landscape for a longer period of time.
Yeah.
So that's it. If CWD just killed them dead the second they got it, that would be the best case scenario, because then they're not spreading it all over the landscape. But that's just not the case.
Well, see, that's what a lot of my concerns were seeing that bill pop up, and I was like, there's really nothing, in my opinion, that shows me what why that needed to be done.
Mm-hmm.
And from that, then you start getting all these questions forming in my head or forming in other people's head that I read on the comments. And I was like, that is kind of true. People worried about if it does happen. And like I said, I didn't know until now that it wasn't even that the deer aren't getting released anytime soon.
Yeah.
Because like you said, the verbiage was sounding like it was happening here pretty quick. So that's what I was like, man, that's kind of crazy to hear about it, and then it's happening without here's the whys. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, we're at that point right now when we're trying to figure out the why.
Yeah, that's good to hear. That's a little settling because I've had a lot of people ask me, about that, and I have my own thoughts that hit when I heard that, and I was like, man, this is gonna get, like for instance, I'll name one right now. When it first came out, and they're like letting deer, and they're gonna let private landowners buy them and all that. I was like, man, is that that kind of sounds like someone's pushing to get better genetics here, rack wise. And that's what a lot of people, after I said that to myself, a lot of people were commenting. And so, yeah, that definitely clears up a lot of muddy water on that subject. So, but do you have something?
I was gonna ask I was just gonna ask the low hanging fruit of what everyone else is gonna ask about the CWD stuff here in Oklahoma, because it's a big culture here. Are we ever, like, if it gets here? I mean, okay, it's here. Technically,
yeah.
When it starts moving across the state, are we gonna ban corn piles? Is baiting gonna get, is that on the table?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's smarter to say that nothing is off the table.
Fair. Yeah.
There are, we wrote that management plan to have enough flexibility to apply it to certain situations or conditions. A lot of states have gone to a ban. A lot of states have kind of found a middle ground where you can only bait from October to January, where, they look at it as, the use of bait is assisting in harvest of deer, which then assists us in numbers of deer for testing and also in trying to keep that population under control. So it's a double-edged sword of this helps us accomplish goals for monitoring the disease. It accomplishes a goal of helping us achieve population goals, but it also, the big elephant in the room is it's a vector for spread. So you kind of have to weigh some of those out on is it going to benefit us more or is it going to hurt us more to keep or ban feed? I mean, in those areas where we had CWD, deer population levels are already really low. That Texas County area, some of that SSA, you're talking a deer every 2,000 acres, a deer every 2,500 acres. I mean, very low deer density. But then you drop down into the river bottom, and it's a deer every 200 acres, a deer every 160 acres. So the situation there didn't necessarily call for a feed ban. But again, it's going to be a situational deal. I wish I had a crystal ball to tell you, but that's one of those deals where you're going to have to make decisions, and those are decisions that are made even above my head. I mean, I can make recommendations. I always say I get paid to make recommendations. They get paid to make decisions.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how that will shake out.
So Dallas, thanks for coming on today and giving us your time and backing up all these people, or backing up or shooting down all the people's theories that they have out there on the worldwide internet, and giving us some data to support that and your facts.
Yeah, I mean, it's important stuff to talk about, just to kind of nip some of that stuff in the bud, and hopefully, people that listen will be open-minded to at least listening and changing their mind. Because I mean, a lot of people that have opinions like that are going to be set in their ways, and there's nothing that you or me or anyone can do to change them. But that's what we get paid for, man.
Absolutely. And for the people that are riding the fence, this will give them some actual information
Yeah.
to back aside.
Yeah.
And it's not just
Don't get
myth.
your news from Facebook, people.
Absolutely. Or
Call
one
me.
page.
My number is on the website everywhere, and I'll talk to you just like I've talked with these guys here about all this stuff. So
Right.
I appreciate you guys having me on.
So if anyone wants to look into some of the data or any of this, is there a spot they can go in and kind of look up some of the data you mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, all of our harvest data is found in our big game report. That's a piece that I put together every year. You can find it on our website. Just hop up into that search bar on the wildlifedepartment.com, search big game report. You can find all the harvest data, all the breakdown on method harvest, everything like that. If there's something in particular that you're requesting or want to know, shoot me an email or give me a holler. Again, my contact info is all over our deer pages if you look for it. So holler at me.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're listening and kind of want to know how to get a hold of him, I'll put the description to his kind of account or his page with Oklahoma Wildlife Department, and he'll pull up and he'll show his email and his number and all that. So, yeah, thanks for coming on. It's been a blast, and I hope we can do another one in the future.
Yeah, appreciate it, guys. Thanks again.